Hi, my name is Marina Khoury, and I'm a partner with DPZ, and I manage our Washington, D.C. office. And I'm writing a paper about leaning towards LiveWorks, or LiveWork Units in particular, and how to make them more permissive. For people like Brian, who got up and said he had an illegal space. He had to use an illegal space because there were no options available to him. And they're essentially illegal and or discouraged in vast majority of places from a zoning standpoint, but the building code requirements are also so onerous or that it makes it very expensive to build. So I'm proposing some options of how we can fix that. So there's a ton of literature out there as to why we want more LiveWork units. People want more autonomy, they want more flexibility, they're tired of traffic congestion. Increases in technology certainly make it more possible. Obama, during the 2010 snowstorm we had in DC, was so upset that the capital city of the US, the federal government had to shut down for an entire week. And he demanded that every department within the federal government figure out a way to allow teleworking. And as a result of that, every department at different levels of, to different degrees of success and speed are trying to figure out ways in which they can telework. And it's certainly possible now. Demographic trends are also trending that way. It's better socially, people are happier. It's good for women, even though more men telework than women. People tend to think it advantages women. It does, but also advantages men. So it's just, there's a ton of reasons why you want to permit LiveWorks. It also, we talk about creating mixed-use communities. It's also a way to really create mixed-use communities, it's a wonderful place to integrate socially. And last but not least, we keep hearing about the idea of a sharing economy, and it can start with being able to share spaces. So, a little bit about the numbers. The number of teleworkers are steadily increasing. 10% for those, there's 10% of workers in America who one day a week telework. But 7.5% are working exclusively from home. And I'm sure many of you know, either are doing it yourselves or know people that are. And those are not insignificant numbers. Small is big in our economy, and LiveWorks are becoming more desirable. And we don't have a setting for small. It's really hard. And that has implications from a mortgage standpoint, from an insurance standpoint, from a bank lending practices standpoint. So we really want to figure out a way to allow that to happen. But small is big also in the context of over 50% of firms employ less than 4 people. So it really creates a really good reason to allow for LiveWorks. And 5% of all wages are paid to organizations with 1 or 4 people. And home-based businesses are increasingly prevalent. And that's 20 to 25% of the market is certainly not insignificant. And then the next 30 years are going to bring demand for 1 billion square feet of non-residential space, or almost twice what exists today. Now, how much of our existing stock will be retrofitted and rehabbed will be probably a significant amount, but it does mean that there's pent-up demand. And the building industry just hasn't kept up with it because our zoning codes and building codes have made it practically impossible. So some people argue that the oldest form of housings is a form of LiveWork, the shop front. And I Googled shop fronts or LiveWorks from around the world, and you find them everywhere, in Brazil, in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, certainly in Europe. They're everywhere. And it's basically because people lived and worked in the same building. So it's not a new concept. We're also about defining, and we've talked about the lexicon, and we want to be very specific in terms of how we define LiveWorks. And they fall into 3 distinct categories. A home office, and home offices in most places are legally required to be allowed by code. And that's allowing a certain percentage of your house to be dedicated to operating a business. And in most cities, it's somewhere upwards of around 25% maximum. Once you start to get beyond that, then it has to be qualified under something else. Then there's a LiveWork unit, and a LiveWork unit is basically a dwelling that contains a commercial office component, which is limited to less than 50% of the dwelling unit area. And that's a lot of what the presentation today is about. But there's also work-live units, and that's where you may have more than 50% of the dwelling unit allocated to work, but you still want to allow residential components in that. And that's when we rewrote the zoning code for Miami, we created the work-live unit as a category which didn't exist before in the industrial areas that were obviously light industrial areas that were gentrifying, that wanted to allow residential units in place within the city, but didn't quite know how to do it. And the buildings were very easily adaptable for that.
Is that 50% tipping point typical for work live everywhere, or is that your invention?
It's how, from what I've seen, most cities have defined it, certainly how it was defined, how we defined it in Miami. And then within the spectrum of LiveWorks, we've got a sort of an urban to rural continuum, or a definition of how the LiveWorks fit in, and they're flexible in use and organized by their configuration and by the way they sit on the lot. So probably the most, the first one is the live within type, in which you have a shared space. It's basically the home occupation type, where you may convert your dining room or your living room or a bedroom in your house to a work component. The next one is the live above, in which there is an overlap of work and live space, but they can be completely independent, and you can live above and rent below, or use both, or rent out both if you want. And then the other two are the most urban types, in which you can either integrate the work unit into the house. So for example, the live behind type, and these were some, the images you see here are some we designed in Atlanta about 10 years ago now, for the Builders Show. But the live behind type is a type in which the workspace is attached to the house, but it liberates the rear yard for private usage if you so choose to. And depending on how the doors are positioned and all of that, you can separate it out completely, or you can integrate it into the house. So if the dwelling unit owner wants to use it, they can. If they want to lease it out, they can too. And same thing goes for the live in front type, in which you live in front, but you have the rear space in the back, which can be used for work, and it's particularly efficient when you have alleys in the back, and access can be completely independent. So the demarcation of uses is important. The location of the workspace is obviously very important, depending on what uses you allow where. Now, there is a steep regulatory hill to climb. These happen to be the LiveWork units in Kentland, where our office is based. And the codes that were written, there were building code requirements and there were zoning code requirements. And and they're still too limiting. And the building code requirements is a one setting typically, where it makes the form inefficient, it makes the form expensive, depending on whether you have to provide one means of egress, two means of egress, fire separation, updated sprinkler systems, where you have to update your HVAC system. I mean, there's a whole host of things you have to consider. And the fundamental result of that is that they become less affordable. And we really want to find ways to keep them affordable. And we also want to find ways in which to make the requirements specific to the type that they are. It's not one solution fits all. And everywhere we go, and everywhere we design our projects, oh, I'm sorry about that. Our clients initially, when Kentlands did the LiveWorks, nobody wanted to build them because they were afraid. They were a new type, and everybody was worried about it. But now they can't build them fast enough, and and everywhere we go and we get them built, there's an incredible demand for it, for the reasons we spoke about before. So what are some of the potential solutions? Well, the first one is to create mixed-use zoning, and we heard the planning director today from Toronto, well, actually both of them, speak very eloquently about creating different intensities of mixed use, and you want everything to have a degree of mostly everything to have a degree of mixed use within your own zoning codes. So you want to allow for the full range of options. You also want to distinguish the different types of LiveWorks based on their type and use classification. So in the smart code, we have restricted use category, limited use category, and open use category. And one way would be to distinguish the types of LiveWorks based on that. So for example, when the workplace has no physical separation from the residential spaces, then there's no need to require additional 2-hour separations. Obviously, you don't need to have different parking standards. Signage can be what it is in residential neighborhoods. Code standards can be exactly the same. The limited use category is where the workplace begins to be physically separated from the residential space, but both are typically under single ownership or fee simple. So in that case, you want to allow for easy conversions. You want to make it easier within the code to do that. 2-hour separation is probably required, but there may be no need for a second egress or special HVAC system or even necessarily sprinklering it. And for the open use category, that's when the more important or the more onerous building code requirements should fall into place. And as long as there's no, and every use should be allowed in them insofar as there's no noxious effect, and you're not spilling over in terms of noise, you're not spilling over in terms of sound, you're not spilling over in terms of odors or any of that. And we now know that that's typically not the case. So you want to adapt the building code requirement in that manner accordingly as well. You also want to align management control. In many cases, well, actually, let me start with the building code requirements first. There has been progress in there. We heard Andres, I came in late, but I heard him mention something about Laura Harry telling him that the HUD standards have now been adjusted to allow for maybe a greater percentage of a commercial component within a residential, so that's encouraging. The International Code Council used to classify LiveWork under commercial. They're now allowing it to be classified under residential use. That's also encouraging, but we still need additional settings. And from a management standpoint, we need to disalign this as the ownership of the property. So the way the ICC reads right now, if you, even if it's zoned residential, if the ownership and occupancy is not the same, then it's classified under commercial. And that shouldn't be the case. Also, they limit the number of people that are allowed to work within a space. And now when we hear about, the sharing economy and the sharing of everything, that also needs to be disentangled from our code so that we can have the flexibility of certain spaces. And Harriet Trugoni mentioned today the fact that I found the statistics stunning. She talked about cars, and she said that a car, 95% of the time someone uses a car, it's parked. And you're only using it 5% of the time. Well, I was thinking about what are the implications of that on housing? How many of us have empty bedrooms and empty spaces and empty garages and empty accessory units? And so we really need to find a way to allow for the conversion of these units in a faster manner or in an easier manner, and the rehabilitation of rooms, and to be able to rent out a room in your house and not have to worry about having more than 2 or 3 people that are not necessarily related to each other living in the same house. So all of those options have to be made available.
And who was the person who said that?
Harriet Trugoni, she's now with HUD, she's the ex-planning director of DC. And then obviously simplifying the permitting process. We all know what that's like. And then the last one is to grow the home-based businesses and the classifications to accommodate live work. And that could come in the form of many, many different ways. It means, as I was mentioning before, allowing for legalizing accessory units. That's one obvious thing. But many municipalities don't allow it. In Miami, we had to fight long and hard to get outbuildings to be legal within single-family residential neighborhoods. To allow, I saw here when I was walking the day we got here, we went to walk on a commercial street in Allentown, I think it's called, and there are, it's a commercial street that began as a residential street because they have residential houses, but we saw a couple of buildings, evidently single-family homes, that had just attached to their house commercial frontage. And I thought that was I wish I had thought to throw it in, but I was thinking about it as I was sitting there. It was a really good way to address the fact that it's now a main street, but you still have these wonderful homes on it, but it would mean relaxing the standards for setbacks and maybe even allowing for greater lot coverage in your single family lots. Basically facilitating retrofitting in every single possible way. Sinan talked a little bit about this, but incremental urbanism is certainly part of this as well. Starting small and allowing it to grow big. We want to be able, as Brian mentioned, we want people to have as much flexibility in their work options as possible. So you're coming out of college, and another thing Harriet mentioned, our college debt is crushing our students right now. We want to be able to give them an opportunity to live their dream. And I moved here to pursue the American dream. It should still be possible. So start small, allow that to happen, and then grow as it needs to be. And I'll end on a slide of a lot in DC. It's a tiny little triangular lot right there, as you can see it. And it's somebody built their workspace and their property and their house on a separate lot. Most zoning codes say you can only build one principal building on your lot. And if you have an accessory structure, it's limited to a certain size. Well, why not allow, and if you build a 1,000 square foot floor plate and then 400 for your accessory unit, if that's what the limit is, why not allow 700 square feet for both? I mean, we need to be thinking about that as well, and really encouraging us to find all these leftover spaces in our cities when we think about infilling and thinking about the wonderful opportunities that exist. I mean, a little 500 square foot lot and the things you can do on them, and we tend to neglect them. You know, Jeff Speck, for those of you who know him, also found a 500 square foot triangular property in Washington, D.C., and he built his LiveWork on there as well. So there's these missed opportunities that we just need to capitalize upon. And that's it. Thank you.